Democrats in the Senate announced a plan to kick big investors out of the housing market to improve housing affordability. This is coming out of an article from Business Insider, to which I have to say, I've been starved for positive news recently, so I was very thankful to see this headline. But Democrats want to ban hedge funds from buying houses in an effort to improve housing affordability. This bill was introduced in the Senate and would require hedge funds to sell off single family homes over the next 10 years. It would also prohibit hedge funds from owning any single family homes at all. Now, Senator Jeff Merkley, Democrat from Oregon, said that housing in our neighborhoods should be for homes and people, not profit centers for Wall Street. Now, he also said this in a press release. Yet, in every corner of our country, giant financial corporations are buying up housing and driving up both rents and home prices. It's time for Congress to put in place common sense guardrails to ensure all families have a fair chance to buy or rent a decent home in their community at a price that they can afford. Seems pretty basic and obvious to me. But to discuss this with me now is Natalie Bencivenga, an award-winning journalist, political contributor at Pennsylvania Capital Star, and a host at KDKA Radio in Pittsburgh. Natalie, how are you doing today? Thank you for being on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me. And I feel like how are you doing today is such a loaded question these days. But I will say I am doing a little bit better having heard that, because like you, I also feel as though there has been nothing really positive, no silver linings in all the clouds,
Yes.
that seem to be hovering around all of us lately. So to hear that the Democrats are trying to actually do something that would, wait for it, benefit the American people, I was surprised in a very positive and happy way. So yeah, it was a good day when I heard that, for sure.
Yeah, and I have so many thoughts on this. Before I go into
Yeah.
all my long diatribes about how important this is and how
Hmm.
it actually connects to what's happening in the rest of the country with other
Yeah.
political news, before we get into any of that, I first want to open the floor to you. When you first
Mhm.
came across this news, what was your first reaction to hearing the Democrats wanting to try to finally do something
Mhm.
concrete about housing affordability in America right now?
Well, it kind of brought me back to that statement where people always say, these two parties are the same. And to me, this is a glaring example that they are not, because I don't hear anything coming from the Republicans. It's crickets over there, unless I've missed something, where they've worked on any kind of legislation or bill that benefits the American worker. And to me, something like this is exactly that. I was reading some really wild statistics, and I'm going to share one with you. It said that 64% of Americans would welcome a recession if it meant lower mortgage rates, according to USA Today. When we're thinking about that, the idea that people would welcome a recession because housing prices have gotten so out of control, we know something is fundamentally broken. And so this is what our government is supposed to be doing, is stepping in and fighting for the people, because at the end of the day, I really I don't feel like living in sort of like a feudal society where we're all just working on the overlord's property. And if we think that's far-fetched, that's not far-fetched. This is exactly where this is going to be going if we're not careful. So those were sort of my initial reactions. What about you?
You know, it's interesting to me because
Mhm.
when I look at, we just like kind of like zoom in a little bit here because we can talk
Sure.
about macro level stuff, what's happening in the
Mhm.
country, what's happening, in different, big cities. But I want to focus just a quick second on where I live at in Montana. I mean,
Yeah.
we are not immune to what's happening with the housing crisis right now. At the start of 2020, a typical home in Montana was, roughly $282,000. And now it's around $453,000 just 3 years later. It's a 60% increase. I went from personally being on the brink of home ownership to now feeling like, is it going to happen? Like that
Mhm.
was my reality. And just in a
Yeah.
snap, just like that. I've had several friends, colleagues, just like you name it, people that I've, become very familiar with in my life in this city, in this state, who have had to just leave because they couldn't afford to be here anymore. And a community that they've dumped, so many years of their lives into, or maybe they were born here, raised here, essentially being pushed out. Like, no, you can't live here anymore. You cannot afford to live in this community. I mean, wages, did they triple in the last 3 years? No, no, of course not.
No.
They didn't. So, and we never think about the domino effect of something like this.
Right.
I mean, because like you think about housing prices, well, it's such a foundational piece to our lives. If you don't have a stable home, you can't really do that much else. You can't think about, well, can I go back to school if I want to? Well, I have to afford to pay rent. Can I take, a vacation if I want to? Well, no, I can't do that. I have to
Yeah.
pay rent. It's like, oh, can I start a family? Can I afford to have kids right now? Well, not really. I can barely afford rent right now. Like, there's so many different things that kind of cascade from this one foundational piece of our lives. So when it's so far out of balance, when we're in a system where we can't really afford to buy a home, so now we're at the subjugation of landlords who essentially can do whatever they want to do. They can raise prices whenever they choose to. Had friends of mine have their rents go up by five, six, $700 in one shot with no warning. And what are you supposed to do about that? Like
Well,
what
exactly.
what is
We're-
the answer to that? So yes, I kind of like to my first thoughts here were something has to change. I'm
Yeah.
not sure how many different things need to change, but the status quo just cannot be maintained right now, Natalie.
Well, and amen, agree with all of that. And to take it another step forward, what I read from the National Associations of Realtors was that to keep housing affordable, and if the interest rate stayed 8% and prices at the same current level, to your point, guess how much our income has to increase percentage wise?
I mean, I would have to assume by almost half. I mean,
63%.
I wasn't too far off there.
63. So I know you weren't, but that's even more than what you were thinking. Like the reality is when you talk about being out of balance, oh my God, are we out of balance? I look at Pittsburgh, right? Similar situation. For example, the neighborhood that I live in is a suburb that's very close to the city. So it's a desirable neighborhood in the sense that, you can be in the city in no time, but it's still in a walkable little community. When I bought my house, which is 9 years ago now, I paid $98,000 for my
Wow.
house. I put 5 grand down. Okay. This same neighborhood, you couldn't buy in now. The lowest houses here are almost double or triple what I paid. I wouldn't be able to afford a home in my own neighborhood less than a decade later. If that doesn't tell you something, and I don't know where this is all heading, because this is what concerns me is people are struggling to pay their mortgage, they're struggling to pay their rent. They're closing all over the city. They've closed shelters. There's more encampments downtown in our community. Um, there's a lot of anger around the unhoused populations, almost like, what are they doing here? Why are they here? It's like, well, we created this problem, one, and two, where the hell do you want them to go? You shut down the shelters and they can't afford a home, they can't afford an apartment. What do you want people to do? And so there's this lack of compassion. That's what I'm feeling, where it's like everything is coming to a boiling point. And like you said, this is a domino effect. This isn't just housing. This is healthcare. This is childcare. This is a living wage. This is a lack of higher education. This is no good public education for our kids. There's just so many things entwined with this that it's like when you start to pull one thread, it's like everything just starts to unravel. And that's what I'm concerned about, is the whole society is kind of unraveling, and people like Jeff Bezos are just coming in and scooping up all the real estate while we all drown. That's what freaks me out.
Yeah, and that's, and again, do I think that this one thing is going to be enough to kind of like correct course on the housing crisis in America? No, but I think this situation, like many situations in our country, it doesn't involve just one answer. It has to be a plethora of things that you throw at it in order for things to kind of correct course, for things
Mhm.
to kind of stabilize. But getting private equity, getting Wall Street out of the business of buying up homes to turn all these different homes into just another asset in their portfolios.
Yeah.
That's definitely a great building block. We can definitely start there. Will this actually go through Congress? I'm not sure. I'm not
Right.
sure, and I'm not sure that we can kind of get into the specifics of like how this would get through the House and the Senate maybe another day. But these are the conversations that I want brought to the forefront because
Yes.
I think when we talk about, I want to just briefly touch on this. When we're talking about the 2024 election, right? And I see for many reasons right now, people are turning away from the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
Obviously, anger over what's happening in Gaza right now is a whole different subject, but it has felt like a failure to me that the Biden administration has, for the most part, it feels like they're trying to coast on, hey, we are better than Trump. We are better than the Republicans. Let that be enough. Just let
Mhm.
that be enough. Don't question anything else. Just let that be enough. That's all you need to know. The guy I'm running against has 91, felony charges against him. Let that be enough. And the
Mhm.
problem for them is that that's not enough. That's not enough. People are
That's not.
struggling. People are really struggling. You have to give people something to vote for, not just something to vote
You
against. And
have
I
to
just really
inspire
need,
people.
yes. And I just don't see them doing that. Like
Mm-mm.
you can't just sell me on Trump's a bad person. Now get out there and vote. It's like, hey, the country's still bad. We need you to do things for us
Yeah.
too.
Well, I really felt that, not to pivot us onto another topic, but I really felt that when everything started falling apart with Roe v. Wade. And I remember Biden specifically saying, will you better vote? And it was like, dude, the whole thing frustrated me to no end because I think the problem with the Democrats in this situation is it's almost like it behooves them to keep these problems here because then they don't really have to
Oh,
actually do much, right? Because
oh,
then they
don't
can
want to go
just
down
say,
that conversation rabbit hole.
I mean, then they can just say, but I'm not this guy. I'm not this person. The
Yeah.
reality is, we need a doer. We need somebody that is going to take bold, progressive steps towards helping everyone. Because the reality is, you and I might lean progressive, right? We may talk about things in a more humanistic, collective sense. But the truth of it is, Republicans have to buy homes too. Republicans have to live in places too. Libertarians, whoever you are, these are the issues that connect us all. And the reality is they're continuing to divide and conquer each demographic of people by pitting us one against another. And this is not new. This has been going on really for hundreds of years in how they prevent us from coming together. And to me, an issue like housing is a very clear-cut issue of how this benefits the masses. This is something that I think a lot of people could get behind regardless of their political party. And these are the kinds of things, if the Democrats were smart, that they would be messaging, all over the place, because those are the issues that are going to impact people in their daily lives, and the things that are really going to make a difference generationally when we're talking about building wealth and pulling people out of poverty. And it's a missed opportunity if they don't capitalize on it.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, wages are not keeping up with inflation. The
Oh,
cost of
no.
healthcare is still
Mm.
way too high. I'm the kind of person who I believes that the term medical debt shouldn't exist, but that's a different conversation for a
I'm
different
with you
day.
on that all the way. That's
And also
insane.
school lunch debt shouldn't exist.
Oh,
But this particular subject, again, I just
mhm.
cannot stress enough the domino effect of this. I mean, the single greatest, um, the single greatest, I guess, like reason that people are able to generate wealth in the first place is becoming a homeowner.
100%.
And it's being taken away from so many people. How many people are in their 30s, in their 40s, still being forced to live with roommates, not out of choice, but because they have no other option? And yes, there are certain parts of the country where this may not really play into, but the problem is that where this was almost like a unique situation for cities like Chicago and Los Angeles and New
Right.
York. You kind of knew that when you were moving to a city like that, but that's
It's
becoming more
hitting
and more prevalent
Montana and
everywhere now.
Pennsylvania now.
Yes, it's becoming prevalent everywhere now. I have friends in their 30s who live in this city who they don't have a choice. They just
Mm.
do not have a choice with the jobs that are in this community, with the housing prices in this community. You do not have a choice if you want to live here. Your only other option is to leave here. And that's not always an option either. Some people can't just pick up and move. Like everyone's like, oh, if it's so expensive, they won't just move. It's not really an option for everyone. And
I
it's a
always love
really
how
bad
that's like
talking
in,
point.
I always love how that's the answer. Like, then just leave. Where? Like home. Like, this is where my community and my friends are. Like, what are you, this is where my coffee shop is. Like, what are you talking
Yeah.
about? But you know, the other issue that's sort of attached to this as well that people aren't talking about is the fact that senior health care and the
Mm,
cost of assisted living is so outrageous. The other thing that's happening is that people that do own homes, they're going through like the equity in their home so quickly, or they have to sell their parents' home to pay for long-term assisted living, because a lot of
right.
people don't realize Medicare doesn't cover any kind of long-term health care, like health assisted living healthcare. And that we should do a whole other show on, not to, because that is a wild ride, my friend. But the
Yeah.
reality is now what's happening is we've got this older generation, the boomers, and they're aging into homes, they're aging into assisted living, they're going through their savings. They're not going to potentially even be passing homes along to their children that they may have. And now their children, us, and people a little older and a little younger than us, they're not going to be able to afford the homes now in their communities. So they're never going to build wealth. So what we've really done is just cut this off on many ways, like many stops along the way, to really ensure that there's going to be a ruling class. And I know that sounds dramatic, but that's the reality. If we want to prevent that from happening, this conversation that the Democrats want to have about, you know, nipping this in the bud, this is a great start. And then there's so many other things that we can start to implement. But to your point, if we're not having this conversation and we're not pushing for this kind of legislation to be brought to a vote, then we're doing all of ourselves a disservice, all of us.
Absolutely. And, again, it'll be one of those ongoing conversations. If you've been following me for any amount of time, especially on Instagram, you know that I talk about the housing crisis a lot. So we'll definitely be having this conversation more and more in the future. But Natalie, I want to thank you for coming on today and just giving me a little bit of hope through all of the bad news that we have in America right now. For those who are interested, where can they find you at online if they want to connect more with your content?
Oh, thanks so much for having me. And yeah, you can find me on Insta, TikTok, LinkedIn, literally any space at Natalie Bencavanga. And you can check out my website, nataliebensavanga.com. Thanks again.
Perfect. For those who are interested, those links will be in the episode description. And if you have some thoughts on maybe some things we missed in this conversation, please go ahead and leave a comment below. And I hope that you will check us out in our next episode. We'll see you then. Thank you for watching this video of Independent Thought. If you liked the conversation, please go ahead and give the video itself a like, and be sure to subscribe for future episodes on the channel.